So on to agenda item number 2. It is the review of the 2022 annual meeting format and participation that I would like to walk you through next. Sue and I are presenting together from the NSCN boardroom, and the auditor from Grant Thornton, Chris Treneman, will be presenting virtually from his office. While we have all gotten fairly skilled with technology required for virtual meetings over the past 2 years, we do know that sometimes help is needed. IT staff are standing by to provide support for those who may experience technical issues. I ask that you please type in the any technical issues that you have in the chat box in the bottom of your screen. If you require assistance, then somebody will reach out to you. Turning to the materials for today's agenda, everyone who would have received an email with the links to the information required for this afternoon's meeting, including the annual agenda, minutes from the 2021 NSCN annual general meeting, the 2021 NSCN annual report, and the NSCN bylaws. And lastly, a resource titled the NSCN 2022 annual meeting participation. I would like to bring your attention to item number 7 on the annual meetings agenda titled discussion period. This is an opportunity for you to raise questions that you may have and an opportunity for us to respond. You can ask a question or make a comment on the information presented. You can also ask a question concerning other nursing regulatory matters. While we address your questions during the scheduled discussion period, we encourage you to submit your questions at any point during this meeting using the chat function, which you will find at the bottom of your screen. You can type your question into the chat box, click enter, and send the message to us. You can also look for the chat icon in the meeting control menu. It looks like a speech bubble. If you don't see the menu, hover your mouse over the bottom of the screen and you should be able to see the icon that I'm referring to. In order to ensure that everyone has an opportunity to participate, we ask that you ask questions on a topic only once. As chair, I will use discretion on limiting or extending questions or discussion to ensure proper functioning of the annual meeting and to adhere to the agenda timelines, which were approved by the board. We will address as many of your questions as possible during the time allotted. If you are unable to get your question because of timing or because the question requires more consideration so that we can offer a thorough response, we have committed to respond in writing to all questions received and sharing this information on the NSCN website and newsletters. Now, let's move along to agenda item number 3, minutes from the 2021 NSCN annual meeting. You would have received a link to a copy of the 2021 NSCN annual meeting minutes. The board has approved these minutes on February 23rd, and they were submitted for your information. Agenda item number 4. A call for resolutions was issued on January 12, 2022, and closed on February 18th. This provides the registrants an opportunity to submit resolutions to be considered pursuant to bylaw 25. The board did receive resolutions from registrants. 2 of the resolutions required that the college hire specific types of nurses to work on staff. The board determined that these resolutions were operational in nature with respect to employment matters and were therefore not appropriate for resolution. I note, however, that the CEO directed members of the NSCN leadership team to meet with the movers and the seconders to discuss the resolution. Additionally, 4 resolutions were submitted requiring NSCN to take action or direct government to take action with respect to COVID-19 related matters. The board determined that these resolutions were outside the jurisdiction of the college and were therefore not appropriate for resolution. The movers and the seconders were all directed to the appropriate decision makers who could address the points. As a result, the board did not receive any resolutions that met the requirements as outlined by bylaw 25 for advancements at this annual meeting. This is also an opportune time to remind attendees and indeed all stakeholders that you do not need to wait to bring a matter forward to the NSCN board for consideration at NSCN at the once-a-year meeting. According to Board Policy 3.13.4, registrants have the opportunity to raise matter for board consideration at any time during the year. I would invite you to please visit the NSCN website for board policy and more information on the process. But please know that the NSCN board and staff are accessible and available to registrants at your time for convenience, not just once a year during this meeting. Now, on to agenda item number 5, the NSCN 2021 annual report. At this time, I would like to remind you again that you are welcome to submit questions that you would like to have addressed during the discussion period. Please remember to submit your questions using the chat function at the bottom of your screen. I will now invite Sue to join me in presenting our Chair and CEO report. Sue?
Thank you, Jason. Good afternoon, everyone. As we turn to our annual report, it's so beautiful. I'd like to start by acknowledging that 2021 was another challenging year for Nova Scotians as we face the second year of the COVID pandemic. However, 2021 also marked our second anniversary as Nova Scotia's one nursing regulatory body. To say that we've experienced some extraordinary events that have acted as catalysts for innovation and change along our path as the new one nursing regulator would be an understatement. In fact, we believe we owe much to the success of our pandemic response during the last 2 years for being the one nursing regulator for all nurses in Nova Scotia. Last year, we continued to build upon what we had learned in our first year as NSCN. And we worked collaboratively with our partners to align our approaches and strategies to strengthen our collective actions on behalf of the public that we serve. NSCN, as a young and evolving regulator, will continue to view the challenges we face as opportunities to implement innovative solutions that will have a positive impact for all Nova Scotians. In starting with the annual report, I'm going to make some highlights throughout, but I encourage you to read through it. We focus on the highlights of how we delivered on our 3 strategic objectives: effective, transparent, and accountable regulation. Let's start with effective regulation. On page 8 of the report, you'll see a few examples of how we delivered on the strategic goal of effective regulation. I'd like to start with RN prescribing. As we all know, roles and responsibilities of nurses and all healthcare professionals continuously evolve to meet the needs of the public. Since 2016, NSCN has been part of a provincial committee that had a goal of improving access to healthcare by enabling RNs with specialized education to prescribe medication within their areas of expertise, practice setting, and client population. Our role on the committee was to make sure Nova Scotians received safe care from nurses, and this included developing a regulatory framework to ensure that only those who have the knowledge, skills, and advanced education are able to register and practice as an RN prescriber. The NSCN board approved the new bylaws in 2021, which enabled RN prescribing for qualified registrants and set up requirements for the approved education. To support this initiative, NSCN developed new processes and practice support tools for RN prescribers. And I'm so proud and excited to report that the first RN prescribers graduated in December of 2021. Jason.
Thank you, Sue. The NSCN board held its first nominations and elections process to successfully welcome new registrants to the board. We are pleased to have received over 40 applicants from registrants who put their names forward for 3 positions on the board. The processes result in the introduction of 3 new registrant members who began their terms on June 1st last year. Those individuals are joining us today. The board also selected its new executive. I began my term as board chair last summer and was joined by Vice Chair Anne-Marie Delory, who is a public representative. The selection of the board executive is made up of both registrants and public representatives, highlights the importance of members of the public to NSCN as a whole.
Thank you, Jason. I feel like we're morning show co-anchors here. Before we move on, I do want to acknowledge Jason as the second board chair of the Nova Scotia College of Nursing. For those who don't know, Jason has a wealth of knowledge and experience, governance experience and experience as a nurse. And Jason was on the board not only as now with NSCN, he was on the Legacy College of the College of Licensed Practical Nurses of Nova Scotia. He was a registered member for the board for over 3 years with CLP-NNS, a member of the NSCN board since we were created in 2019, and now he's the first LPN to serve in the role as board chair. Jason has played a huge key role in the creation of NSCN, and I'm so grateful for his leadership over the last few years. Moving on to continuing in the annual report to talk about effective regulation, I'd like to talk a bit about pathways to licensure. As the province's nursing regulator, we are accountable to ensure those who are granted a license to practice in nursing in Nova Scotia are qualified and safe to do so. We are committed to an ongoing assessment of our processes, and we actively and continuously look for opportunities for quality improvements. Last year, NSCN made a number of changes, leveraging our nimble and innovative Nursing Act. We work to modernize and streamline the way applicants are able to demonstrate they meet registration requirements. These enhancements created new and innovative pathways to licensure, all while ensuring public safeguards are there to protect Nova Scotians. These changes enabled qualified applicants to have earlier access to the registration exam, earlier access to the profession, and earlier re-entry to practice. I can't state enough those 3 huge improvements, and all ultimately not only increasing the supply of nurses, but it's all about continuing to provide access for our Nova Scotians. I'd like to expand further around COVID-19 and emergency conditional licenses, or as we call them here, ECLs. When COVID first began in 2020, NSCN very quickly adapted to the changing needs of the healthcare system by developing a registration process that allowed us to rapidly reinstate qualified former nurses by granting an emergency conditional license. As the needs of the healthcare system changed and we saw a reemergence of COVID in early 2021, we collaborated with stakeholders and developed another innovative solution to add to the supply of nurses in the system. The province's vaccination program implemented last year presented an opportunity for NSCN to expand our current emergency conditional license requirements to include former nurses who had been out of practice longer than those that we added to the system in 2020. We recognized these individuals had valuable skills to contribute, so they were granted a second type of emergency conditional license. This one included some conditions and restrictions, but it allowed those nurses holding these licenses to practice in specific COVID-19 support roles. This solution supported the supply of nurses in the healthcare system while ensuring safeguards were in place to protect the public. We would, of course, like to acknowledge and thank those individuals who came out of retirement from nursing to provide COVID relief when it was needed most. Let's talk a bit about a new regulatory information system. In 2021, we began the important work of defining what a new regulatory information system needed to be, and the fact that we needed to replace the separate databases that we had from the legacy colleges, the College of Licensed Practical Nurses and the College of Registered Nurses of Nova Scotia. The work involved a very thorough examination and evaluation of our process and looking ahead and thinking outside the box and identifying the technical requirements that would provide us a technical solution that will grow with the needs of the public and all our stakeholders. We are looking forward to presenting our stakeholders with one new platform that will support NSCN's operations and strategic objectives. Let's talk a minute about KPIs, or key performance indicators. As a new and evolving regulator, it's so important for us to articulate and measure how NSCN will set and continue to meet our goals and objectives as a regulator. For that reason, I'm especially pleased to share that NSCN has developed key performance indicators as part of our foundational work as a new regulator. These KPIs provide focus on our strategic and operational enhancements that will allow us to measure our performance and progress in critical areas. Our work last year involved assessing our strategic objectives that contribute to NSCN's regulatory mandate of protecting the public. We were able to identify what data is required and the intended results of our goals in a measurable manner. The KPIs were developed along with a scorecard. And we look forward to reporting this in not only next year's annual report, but shortly in the next few weeks on our website. There'll be notification that will go out, and we're really excited to be able to show this to you. Let's move on now to transparent regulation. And I'd like to start with cybersecurity. On page 11 of the annual report, we feature highlights of how NSCN has just demonstrated the objective of how we are meeting transparent regulation. You don't have to look very far to see real and present danger of cyber threats around the world and here in Nova Scotia. Cyber attacks seem to be in the media on an almost daily basis. Last year, we updated our cybersecurity program with a number of safety elements that were added to protect the integrity of the system and the confidential information that we store. Additionally, we increased cybersecurity training for all staff and our team to help them recognize potential red flags and reduce the risk of potential data breaches. This allows us a more secure connection to the internet, which reduces the risks of cyber attacks and ensures that our system remains accessible to the public, registrants, and all our stakeholders. Let's talk a minute about evaluation of our standards and guidance service area. At NSCN, we walk our talk of our commitment towards continuous improvement and continuing to examine our processes and services and look for ways we can continuously improve. In 2021, we asked for specific feedback from registrants that would help us better understand their experience as a customer. In particular, we wanted to know if the customers were satisfied with their experience and the resources provided by NSCN's practice consultants. Stakeholders completed an online survey that evaluated our tools, advice, and the methods that we provided information. We collected feedback for over 6 months and received feedback from 776 registrants. Among other statistics, 87% told us they were very satisfied with the information they received when they reached out for support. 85% of individuals were satisfied or very satisfied with the information they received through group sessions delivered by NSCN. All the feedback has been instrumental in identifying how we can better enhance the regulatory services we provide to all our stakeholders. And we thank our stakeholders who took the time to share their input with us. Diversity and inclusion. As a regulator and employer, we are committed to creating positive change and while still fostering a respectful environment where diverse voices from all communities are sought, heard, and incorporated in meaningful ways. As part of NSCN's diversity and inclusion journey, we implemented what we refer to as our diversity and inclusion roadmap in 2021. I'm doing a Vanna here where I'm showing it, but you'll be able to click a link to see it in more detail. The roadmap enables staff and the NSCN board to take ownership of learning and education focused on identified equity-seeking groups. It's a 3-phase plan, and it allows us to explore and discuss key learnings related to racism, bias, and privilege in relation to the groups that we have been working with. We're proud that we met and engaged a number of guest speakers from various diverse communities. And they have really helped us in our learning from their lived experiences. And we partnered with a local diversity, equity, and inclusion group of consultants to assist us in this work and on our journey. And it has been very helpful and incredibly valuable to the staff and board. While we are first focusing on the diversity and inclusion journey internally, the next phase of our work will involve our external reach as a regulator. We know that the healthcare community has a growing responsibility to improve diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, not only for employees, but most importantly, for clients and their families as well. It is key for patient safety and better health outcomes. This is important work. We'll continue and we'll build on it and look forward to sharing our progress and our plans. Let's talk now about stakeholder consultation. Input and feedback from our stakeholders is very important to NSCN, and we consider all perspectives and factors as part of our decision-making process. In 2021, we conducted 7 very large consultations with stakeholders with a minimum of 30 days, with matters ranging from quality assurance to bylaw amendments. This included bylaws modified to adopt and reflect the revised and updated standards of practice for licensed practical nurses, and it also included entry-level competencies for licensed practical nurses, both of which are foundational documents for our almost 5,000 LPNs practicing in Nova Scotia. Again, we ask for support in terms of feedback to help us enhance what we do on behalf of the public, and registrants responded to this call as a self-regulated profession, which we thank you for. And last but not least, let's talk about our third objective, accountable regulation. I want to talk a minute about regulatory committees and some of the increased training that we've been doing. On page 13 of the annual report, we highlight a couple of ways we have demonstrated accountable regulation. Regulatory committees and NSCN staff routinely issue regulatory decisions as part of our work as a regulator. To ensure that our decisions are communicated clearly, several regulatory committee chairs, vice chairs, and NSCN staff participated in very focused training this past year, working with a national regulatory legal expert, Richard Steinecke. Richard provided additional education around the skill of writing reasons for the regulatory decisions. This assisted regulatory committees and NSCN staff in drafting regulatory decisions that provide clear and comprehensive reasons for that decision. Most importantly, this training helps those on the receiving end, applicants, registrants, members of the public, in learning about the rationale for these decisions. Now, in closing, I encourage you to please read the report for more comprehensive information. As always, we are grateful for those who continue to play a role in the provision of safe, competent, ethical, and compassionate care to all Nova Scotians. On behalf of the NSCN team, I'd like to thank you for your participation in the work we do on behalf of the nursing profession in Nova Scotia. Before I hand things back to Jason, I'd also like to acknowledge and thank all the NSCN staff and all the board for their ongoing commitment and tremendous support. Like all of us living through the pandemic, these folks have managed their personal impact of the pandemic while maintaining all of their professional commitments. While the challenges of the last couple of years have been many, I am so grateful, and you have my heartfelt appreciation for all that you do in helping us deliver on our mandate of leading to inspire regulatory excellence and to uphold public confidence. Thank you. Jason.
Thank you, Sue. I would like to begin by thanking those we are here to serve, the public of Nova Scotia. You are why NSCN exists, and the motivation not only behind NSCN governance work, the board does as well. I would also like to thank the close to 16,000, which actually I think is 15,936 nurses NSCN regulates across the province. It has been another challenging year in healthcare, and as a nurse, I understand the challenges you have faced. I see the sacrifices you have made, and I am grateful for the support you have shown to NSCN as self-regulated professionals. I would like to recognize the board for their work that often goes on behind the scenes as a governing body, and thank each board member for their efforts at the board table, especially Charmaine McPherson, who was NSCN's first board chair before me, transitioning out of this role June last year. My working relationship at the board level began with Charmaine when she was on the board of CRNNS and I was on the CLP NNS board. It was a privilege to work with you over these last few years. I would especially like to acknowledge those board members whose terms are coming to an end in just a few days. Shanda McDonald, Teresa McDonald, Betty Thomas, Susan Nasser, and Michael Gillis. I hope that you continue to be proud of what you've accomplished as NSCN's first board members and the journey that you have helped create. I should add, as a point of interest, that this is a rather historical moment in part of the evolution of the NSCN board. Aside from myself, Shanda, and Teresa, we were the last remaining registrant board members hailing from the legacy colleges. And Betty, Susan, and Michael are the last remaining public representatives hailing from the legacy colleges. And part of the board team that advanced the creation of one nursing regulator in Nova Scotia. It has been a privilege to work with you so closely over the past number of years, and I know how integral you have been to the creation of NSCN. I would like to thank Sue for her leadership and support through what we could call another challenging year in the midst of a pandemic. Our journey began together in 2017 with the work of creating one nursing regulator, and I remain grateful for your guidance over the years. Now, on to agenda item number 6, the NSCN 2021 Auditors Report. The Auditors Report is included in the NSCN annual pre-circulated report, and it is available on the NSCN website. Mr. Christopher Treneman from Grant Thornton will present the 2021 Auditors Report for NSCN. I will now ask Mr. Treneman to present the Auditors Report. We will have an opportunity to address any questions about the report during the discussion period that follows this presentation.
Thank you, Jason. Let's see if I can share my screen here. All right. Is my screen up?
Yes, it is.
All right. Well, thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. Happy to be here, at least virtually, at the annual meeting of the Nova Scotia College of Nursing. So as Jason noted, my name is Chris Treneman, and I lead the annual financial statement audit for the Nova Scotia College of Nursing. And really, this afternoon, just wanted to walk everyone through a few points from our audit process in the current year. So back on April 28th, we had the opportunity to meet with the NSCN board to review the draft financial statements for the current year under audit. At that point in time, we had discussions, we walked through the financial statements, as well as we had communication for the various required pieces under the Canadian auditing standard. So I am pleased to report this afternoon that as a result of our audit and from our discussions, there are no unusual items identified. There's no fraud identified during the course of our audit, or any significant control deficiencies that have come to our attention. So this is great news, and really resulted in a clean audit process from our end, which is great to have. So I do extend my thanks to the financial team and the rest of the team at NSCN for the hard work in preparing for the financial statement audit. At the April 28th meeting, the board did approve the financial statements. So that establishes the audit report date. So when the audit opinion is signed, it will be signed or has been signed with an April 28th, 2022 date on it. And as noted on the last point on the slide here, we were able to issue what would be considered a clean audit opinion, so an unmodified audit opinion for the current year. I'd now like to take you through a quick high-level walkthrough of the financial statements themselves. We did include a capture of the financial statements on the slide deck. However, it might be a little bit small on your screens, but it is a direct excerpt from the annual audited financial statements, so you can refer to those as well. The first main page of the financial statements would be the statement of operations, and this provides a high-level overview over the course of the year with comparative figures for the 2020 year end, and really highlights the revenues and the expenditures of NSCN during the course of the year. So looking first to revenues, we see that revenues are pretty consistent year over year, 7.3 million versus 7.1 in the previous year. So a little bit of an increase, but overall quite consistent. If we look at the breakdown of those expenses or of those revenues, though, we do see a couple swings in the current year. So the first is licensing fees. You'll notice that the licensing fees have increased from 6.69 million up to 7 million and change in the current year. And that's really driven by an increased total registrant number, as well as increases to the RN and Nurse Practitioner Canadian Nurses Protective Society membership fees. I would also like to note that although there is an increase in the licensing fees, this is not driven by an actual increase in the fees charged by they call it Nova Scotia College of Nursing. The other swing to the revenues in the current year is the investment income. So the investment income just shy of 300,000 last year, dropping to 180 for the 2021 year ended. And really that's driven by the market performance. So still a positive number, just not quite as positive as the 2020 year. And when we turn to expenses, we see that expenses for the year are very consistent year over year, 6.8 million versus 6.8 million. Although there have been some allocation differences, total expenses are very consistent. The next main page of the financial statements would be the statement of financial position, also referred to as the balance sheet. Looking at the statement of financial position, we see that the Nova Scotia College of Nursing remains in strong financial position at the end of the year. So this statement shows a point in time. So these numbers are presented as at December 31st, 2021, with comparatives for the December 31st, 2020 year end. Looking at the assets first, a couple pieces to note. Total assets have increased year over year, demonstrating again solid financial position of the Nova Scotia College of Nursing. There have also been some swings within the investment balance. You can see that short-term investments dropping from 900,000 to 277, but at the same time, long-term investments increasing substantially as well. And really that's driven by timing. When amounts are due within the next 12 months, they're moved to short-term. In the current year, because the instruments have longer lifespans, they've been moved to the long-term investment. Also in the current year, we see a bit of a swing in prepaids, moving from just shy of 500,000 up to 737 in the current year. And that's really largely driven by the Canadian Nurses Protective Society membership fees being paid in advance and still having balances owing throughout the next fiscal year. From a liability side, there's a large swing around payables and accruals. And really that's just due to timing of when invoices and amounts come due and when the balances are paid. In addition, we see a bit of a swing in deferred revenue for the current year. And that's a direct correlation to the increase in licensing fees that we would have seen on the last page. Because the licensing year doesn't align exactly with the calendar year, it means that there are a number of prepaid amounts at the beginning of each fiscal year, or at the end of each fiscal year. Page 5 of the audited statements represent the statement of changes in net assets. So this statement shows a continuity of each of the funds held by the Nova Scotia College of Nursing. In the current year, a couple things that I'll draw your attention to. The investment in liquidity reserve has had minor balances adjusted to align with the policy. We do see a bit of an increase in the unrestricted fund, and that's really tied back to what we saw in the statement of operations with the increase in revenues over expenditures for the current year. At the end of the day, we see that the total balance of 3.9 million is up a little bit from 3.4 in the previous year, and shows a healthy position from the Nova Scotia College of Nursing. So I am pleased to report that the Nova Scotia College of Nursing is in good financial condition from that respect. Page 6 of the financial statements highlights the cash flows and really provides a continuity of the financial or of the cash balance year to year. So we can see that in the current year, there has been a $39,000 decrease in cash overall. However, this is really driven by the acquisition of investments for the current year. We see that cash generated from operating activities is positive at 951, which again is great to see because positive cash from operations is always a healthy sign of a healthy organization. The rest of the financial statements would be the required note disclosure. So it encompasses a number of notes. For the current year, everything is pretty consistent. There have been no significant changes to the accounting policies for not-for-profit organizations, which the Nova Scotia Registered Nursing would present on.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Mr. Treneman. We appreciate you joining us today and walking us through that information. We will respond to any questions from meeting attendees and questions or answers that you may want regarding the auditor's report and our agenda in the agenda item coming up next. In saying that, moving on to agenda item number 7, it is our discussion period. I would like to remind you to please submit any questions you would like to have considered via the chat function. We have set aside 10 minutes for this portion of the meeting. Following the annual meeting, NSCN staff will create a Q&A document that will include responses to questions posed by meeting attendees. This will include those questions that we may not be able to get to based on time allotment. The information will be made available on the NSCN website in the days ahead and our next newsletter. And at this time, I would like to ask Heather Thornton, Senior Director, Governance and General Counsel, who has been kindly moderating our chat box, to read the questions received. Heather?
Great. Thank you very much, Jason.
You're welcome.
So we've received several questions through our chat feature today from people who are attending the annual meeting. The first 2 questions I'm going to direct to Sue in your capacity as CEO. And these are 2 questions that are follow-up to Mr. Treneman's presentation on the financial statements of NSCN. The first question is specifically with respect to the line item in the financial statements that NSCN finished the year $481,000 under budget. And Sue, the question for you is why did NSCN end the year with that surplus?
Thanks, Heather, and thanks to whomever asked the question. Well, when we did the budgeting for this past year, I think we were just still in that early phase of COVID and thinking that we would return to life somewhat as usual and planned financially for the next year. Well, as we know, in now our 3rd year, COVID continued. And, I'll cut to the chase on it. As a result, it impacted the budget in that we didn't have travel costs, our board met virtually, some legislative work had to be moved out. And so basically, it mostly just comes down to timing and the impact of COVID. So the one point though, so first of all, any excess of revenues, and as Chris walked us through, goes into a fund, unrestricted fund that we would need and possibly use for unforeseen circumstances, but also the expenses that we planned on, we do fully expect we will incur. It's just that that has to be moved forward into this year, and who knows, possibly the next.
Great. Thank you very much, Sue. And Sue, actually, I think you've started to answer the next question. You must have been reading the minds of people who are attending the annual meeting here, but we do have a related question from Karen, who wants to know why are you not going to use the surplus to decrease licensing fees?
Wow, what a good question. And thank you for the question, whomever posed that. On the surface, and certainly it is a healthy way to end the year, I think a couple of things stand out is that, first of all, many of those expenses will most likely be incurred this year, especially things about legislative work and the cost involved in putting forward legislation and everything we do, including those surveys with registrants, the public, etc. The other thing is that really stands out this year, and just watching the news of late, most people, well, we're all living it. It's the rising costs and, quite frankly, a bit of instability between the war in Ukraine, et cetera, and all of the domino effects of that So it would be a little early for us to plan to decrease fees because of the fact that we will continue to have to pay those rising costs, as well as deal with the other effects from the instability, including our investments. They're very low risk, but still, we definitely have not necessarily yielded the revenue from those investments because we've all been affected by what's been happening in the stock markets. So we just need to hang on. We need to plan for the future. I would like to point out, though, even in the face of continued rising costs outside of what we're experiencing now, is the cost of regulation has continued to increase. And we have found ways to keep looking at streamlining and effectiveness and staffing and whatnot so that we don't have to increase fees. And I think that really stands out. We have had no increased fees as the Nova Scotia College of Nursing. And similarly, the legacy colleges had not had an increase for many years. So sorry, that was a long answer to that question, but I sure hope that helps.
That's great, Sue. Thank you. And yes, that was Karen who asked that question. So thank you very much. Really important question. Just looking through the chat here, and I see our next question. This is a question for Jason as a board chair. This is a question with respect to the election. So Jason, you had talked about last year was our first set of elections, the nominations and elections process here at NSCN for the board seats. But it appears this question actually is about the nominations and elections process from this year, 2022. And this is from Mike, who says, I see that both registrant seats for the NSCN board were filled by registered nurses this year. Can you explain how that happened in that process?
That's a great question, and I would love to give a few different reasons why things really played out this way this year. The nominating committee put out an open call to all registrants. We put out a first call, we put out a second call, and there was no restrictions on who could put their name forward. So that could be an LPN, it could be an RN, it could be an MP. And based upon the applicants, final candidates ended up all being RNs. And I think this is where it's a good time just to remind everybody that it's not about having designations on the board as representatives of individual disciplines of nurses. It's more about being on the board in regulating that public or regulating in the public interest. That's why we're here, not in the registrant interest, in the public interest. So there are ways that, registrants can put input into regulatory matters. So it necessarily doesn't start with sitting on the board or has to end with sitting on the board. That input and feedback on regulatory documents such as bylaws and standards and guiding documents. There's the ability to volunteer on regular committees. So there's all various facets of avenues that, our registrants can get involved with the decisions that are made here at NSCN. So I hope that provides a little bit of clarity around that question. And I just want to reiterate, that's a great question.
Great. Thank you very much, Jason. Moving right along, watching the clock, but we still have time for a couple more questions. I see here, Sue, there's a question for you. You spoke about the diversity and inclusion work that NSCN engaged in this last year. And we have a question from Cheryl who wants to know, can you give more details and specific examples of the work that you did last year?
Sure, and thank you to Cheryl for the question. We certainly know diversity and inclusion and cultural competence are huge. They're just so significant. And when we were created as the Nova Scotia College of Nursing, the board highlighted this and staff incorporated it into our first strategic plan. And so I just want to lay that out there that this has been ongoing. And I did mention our map that we did on diversity inclusion, and it's really laying out a 3-year phased process. And looking at how do we educate ourselves? How do we inform ourselves better? How do we engage with different diverse communities, equity seeking groups, and others. And so we, on the staff level, we first established a diversity inclusion working group that have representation from all of our staff, and really did the work to lay out sort of in prioritizing what groups shall we work with first, bringing in guest speakers, having time allotted that every single staff member would attend. Also, board were included in some of the sessions as well. And then in this past year, we were able to take that work and fill in more detail on the map and the planning. And we focused initially internally to staff and the board so that we could help to educate ourselves, to be better aware, and be much more conscious of bias, possible racism, possible influences that we don't see with the eyes and ears and how we perceive things. And it's been so wonderful to work with so many different groups of folks and just have that learning that we can incorporate in everything from our procedures, our policies, board policies, et cetera. And so as we work into this next year, we'll be doing a much more external focus. So we're happy to share the information. Quite a wealth of information is available on our website. So thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Sue. Jason and Sue, I see we're just about at our time, but I think we do have a few more questions in the chat box. So if it's okay with you, let's do one last question for you. And again, Sue, I think we'll end with you. There's another question at the about operations, and this is a great question. This person says that they have a question about NSCN's education program approval committees, and noting that some of the committee members are affiliated with the schools of nursing, and they're wondering, is this considered a conflict of interest for them to be on that committee?
Oh, wow. What a good question. I'll tell you, I'm just so proud that people are so informed and look for this information. And certainly the educational committee is very important. And I think there's a couple of things as I'm just reviewing this question in my mind. First of all, if any of the schools of nursing for any designation, if their actual program, if there's discussion around it, then the folks affiliated with that educational program would recuse themselves. So right away, whether there's an actual conflict or even perceived conflict of interest, that has always been paramount and really important. But in addition, the other thing that stands out, and we have public representation on all of our committees, and including the educational one. And that's, again, because it's all about the public interest, and those public reps, as well as others, really keep us focused on that accountability we have. And I think it was just like Jason was saying earlier, I just want to remind folks, and even on that committee, even though some folks maybe they're nurses who are affiliated with certain educational programs, they are not there, quote unquote, representing an educational program. They are there for the public interest and not to advance or talk about their programs. It's all about a lens in which we can continue to improve and think of the public that we serve. So I hope that answers that question.
That's great, Sue. Thanks. And I guess I'll get my 2 cents in. I guess that answer really applies to all of the regulatory committees that we have here at NSCN. And that is the privilege we have as a self-regulated profession, that all nurses on all of our committees do put on their public hat when considering matters in front of them to advance the public interest and not their own self-interest or the professional interest.
Hey, Jason, we couldn't have said that any better.
That's great. Well, we are actually, we're beyond time because the questions coming in were really good, and I didn't want to cut off that too soon, but I will note that it is 1:58, and so I will pass it back to Jason and Sue.
Okay, thank you very much, Heather. I would like to personally thank everybody for submitting such excellent questions. To kind of echo Heather's point, to respect everybody's time and keep the meeting on schedule, I am going to have to end the discussion period. I apologize that if we weren't able to get to everybody's questions in this allotted time, but please remember that NSCN staff will be creating a Q&A document with your questions, so please watch for a response to your questions here. The Q&A document will be shared by email to all participants on the NSCN website. And in saying that, I think, I will move on to agenda item number 8, and that's the introduction of the new NSCN board. So before we conclude the meeting, it is my pleasure to introduce to you the new NSCN board members. Joining us on June 1st, just 13 days from now, are the newest members of the NSCN board who were elected by the nurses of Nova Scotia just last week. So welcome to the board, registrants, Partik Brar and Ashley Clements. We welcome you to the board and we look forward to working with you very soon. We will also be welcoming 3 new public representatives on the board effective June 1st, who will be appointed by the Minister of Health. Please watch our website for an announcement for when those appointments are made. And on to agenda item number 9, adjournment of the annual meeting. So on behalf of the board, we thank you for all the time, efforts, and contributions, really to all of you for helping to regulate the nursing profession in the public interest. I would like to thank everybody for joining us today, and I now declare the 2021 annual meeting of the Nova Scotia Nursing College adjourned. Thank you very much for joining us and have a good day.